Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Darrow here with another Options in Play video update. Today's video is going to talk about recent earnings trade switch. Feel that this trade is a great example of why having a game plan is super important and why it's really not smart to chase unusual option activity ahead of earnings. First off, let me say that Kurt and I love to know about unusual option activity as much as anybody else, right? It's part of it's part of uh, it's part of the universe of being an options trader. Those big blocks of options are interesting ways to monitor positioning for the smart money and see what the big funds are doing. And we always are keeping our eye on that unusual activity. Whether it's calls, puts. We like to know where the positioning is, what's going on. What sectors, what stocks. So we always have our eye on it. But that activity, like all those unusual calls or puts, that really shouldn't be the be all and end all of your trading style. Um, and even more so when it comes to earnings. I mean, like it's like that activity can be really, really tough to read or misleading around earnings and other events. And Switch, it definitely highlights that. So that's kind of why we wanted to bring it up. So Switch was a name. I mean, coming into the week, we had it on our radar. We played it a few times this year, and really, it's been an earnings play. We haven't really been swinging it. It's the name that figured uh, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So as you can see, this was the first report, and then here is the second report, and then this is where it was going into this most recent report. I mean, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to see the similarities here. I mean, the stock has just been a really poor performing IPO and just a really strong, aggressive trend lower, uh, with basically every high being lower, each low being lower, and every time it's gotten to this trend ahead of earnings, it's managed to disappoint and put in a lower low. So hit the top of the trend going into the March report, put in a new low. Hit the top of the trend going into the May report. What happens? Drops and puts in a new low. But it's so consistent. I mean, it'll get hit and then rally, hit and then rally. Got hit in May, and guess what? Rallied right into the August earnings like this week. So, you know, again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. What's worked in the past, if the setup still stands, if why it was attractive back then, these past couple quarters is still attractive now. It it would be it's worth it to take the shot at it, right? Uh, so we like the idea of a strangle, and basically, if it was ugly, kind of like the last couple quarters. I mean, what's the pattern, right? Drops to retest the low and then extends lower. So that would be a drop to 12 and then possibly lower prices. If it was good, then I mean, with the stock basically pushed up right against the top of this trend, this long trend. I mean, you could see maybe like a pent up breakout, and I mean, this stock is really heavily shorted, so about 35% of the float is short. So there was a clear gap above, and then it was on the top of the trend. So you can make the argument that either way, there was a reasonably good chance that it was going to move more than what the options were anticipating. So about $2, give or take, right? That I say $2, but I mean like the day of the earnings, the things got jacked up. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. So what happens, right? So we lay out the strategy going into the week. We're going to do a strangle, longer dated calls, and then shorter dated puts. Then the day of the earnings, it was kind of moving around a little bit, and then there just a huge amounts of calls started crossing the tape. The August 15 calls, a couple blocks of 3,000, or one block of 3,000, and then by the end of the day, I think like over 7,000 had traded. and the implied volatility just shot through the roof. So what happens is, it crosses people's unusual options scanners, and then people start talking about it, and they say like, what options? Oh, like the the big money's getting in, like the number would have probably leaked. But the problem with that is that you don't really know what they're doing, right? So yes, like the calls went wild, and the implied volatility exploded. Uh, but what happened to the stock? I mean, it's the exact same thing as the previous 2 quarters. It was the number was awful, and it missed across the board and lowered guidance, and it gapped down and opened near 10. But so like reading that option activity, you don't really know what they were doing. I mean, that could have been people that were short that were looking to cover their upside on a breakout. So that's why it's really tough. It's really tough around earnings to use that unusual option activity. And even then, I mean, even when it's not earnings, I mean, you kind of need to have your own game plan. And then if that option activity lines up with your thesis, then that's awesome. Like that's great. It's always nice having a vote of confidence when your strategy, when the smart money starts to pile onto like a strategy that you already thought of. But you don't want to be exclusively just chasing like those unusual blocks around, because like this is a great example. I mean, like you don't know what they were doing, and like those 15 calls that I think went out, maybe at like 80 cents, the earnings were worthless the next day. And uh, just sticking with the plan, like looking at the pattern here, if you had just done what the pattern dictated, and it said like every time it gets here, you get even if you were bullish here, I mean, like you still had to acknowledge that the past 2 quarters it was the exact same setup, and what happened? I mean, it dropped to put in a new low. So if you respect the pattern and don't just focus exclusively on that option activity, then like these puts, like those August 12th puts paid out really, really. It was August 13th puts, excuse me, paid out really, really big. Um, so that's why like you'll definitely hear us talk about it, but we use the option activity more as a confidence vote, or we find it interesting to know when when the unusual option activity is kind of signaling money rotating into like a sector, and it's kind of hard to just exclusively focus on it. And we want to just highlight switch here, just because we really want to like stress how it's really important to have a game plan on your own and stick to it. And especially when it comes to earnings, because I mean that option activity, like the smart money, if you want to say, it can be really misleading. Um, so yeah, I hope you guys are having a fantastic trading week up until this point. Retail earnings are just starting to come out. Lots of stuff moving around. There'll be plenty of more reports coming up after this. So best of luck trading the rest of today and tomorrow, and I'll talk to you guys soon. All right.